Good afternoon. We are delighted to welcome you to the Stories of Stevens Alumni webinar. My name is Linda Benninghove, and I am the director of the Samuel C. Williams Library at Stevens. We are excited to share with you this webinar by Leah Loskatoff, Head of Archives and Special Collections, and Ted Hotaling, Archivist and Digital Projects Librarian. Today's presentation is a collaboration between the Library Archives and Special Collections and the Division of Development and Alumni Engagement. Before we begin, I would like to share a few housekeeping items. The presentation will run approximately 45 minutes in length, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session and a brief demonstration of our new digital collections portal at the very end. Attendees may use the Q&A tool to submit questions. Questions will be collected and posed to our speakers at the end of the lecture. A recording of this webinar will be shared with attendees and those unable to join us. The chat feature is available during this webinar, but questions must be submitted using the Q&A tool. For Zoom support, please send an email to zoom@stevens.edu. And with that, I will introduce Leah Loskatoff and Ted Hotaling.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, and thank you for joining us. First, I just wanted to mention that this talk will highlight earlier alumni of Stevens. By doing these virtual lectures, we are realizing that it's challenging to cover everything that we want in just one session. So we plan to break out certain topics into parts instead of trying to cover it all in one shot. We hope to help continue with the momentum of the 150th anniversary, even if we must do this virtually at the moment. From the beginning, Stevens has cultivated a distinguished crop of celebrated alumni. Many Stevens students achieved high-level leadership roles, contributed greatly to science and technology, and one even became one of the most famous artists in the world. I'm going to dive right in, so sit back, grab something to drink or a snack, and please note any questions you might have for the end of the talk. Next slide, please. Next slide. Stevens alumnus Frederick W. Taylor was from a wealthy Quaker family and grew up in Germantown in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There is a common story among old Philadelphia families, especially those of Quaker stock, such as the Taylors were. You'd go to school, earn a degree, establish yourself in a profession like law or medicine, then never so much as draw up a brief or treat a patient. The true old Philadelphian was born retired. For someone who didn't need to ever worry about money and didn't need to work a day in his life, Taylor became obsessed with work. In fact, he revolutionized how people work. In 1874, Taylor passed the admissions examination to Harvard University with high honors, but veered away from his predicted life path and decided to forego Harvard altogether and instead started working as an apprentice in a machine shop in Philadelphia. First as a pattern maker, then as a machinist. This hands-on experience made a great impact on Taylor's life, and throughout his correspondence and public testimonies in front of Congress, which I'll get to a bit later, there is an enormous respect for skilled workmen and for knowledge gleaned not from books, but real-life experience. After his 4 years at the machine shop, he moved on to the Midvale Steel Company, where he quickly rose up in the ranks, eventually becoming the superintendent. While at Midvale, Taylor made up his mind to acquire some theoretical knowledge of mechanical engineering. So at the age of 25, he made arrangements with Dr. Morton, the first president of Stevens, to take classes while still retaining his full-time position at Midvale Steel. Taylor would do his studies at night and on weekends, and would come to Hoboken 3 times a year to take exams. Next slide, please. Taylor is best known as being the father of scientific management. Scientific management, also referred to as the Taylor system, can be defined as the application of scientific methods to the problem of maximum efficiency in industrial work or elsewhere. He used time studies to determine the amount of time each job should take, which also guided Taylor into creating the differential piece rate system, in which a slow worker would be paid a lower piece rate for lower production, and rewarding an efficient worker by giving them a higher piece rate for higher production. This piece rate system was altered later on by Taylor's colleague and Stevens alumnus, Henry Gantt, which I'll explain a bit later. But Gantt improved this system in the interest of the workers. The impact that Taylor made can be exemplified by an event in 1977, when management scholars Daniel Wren and Robert Hay got together and asked historians and of business and economics to rank contributors to management thought and practice. Taylor won hands down. He beat out Rockefeller, Carnegie, Alfred P. Sloan, Thomas Edison, and Henry Ford. Scientific management is now so absorbed into the fabric of American life, we can hardly detect it. Next slide. These images depict visual evidence of scientific management being implemented into factories and plants along the East Coast. Scientific management also included office organization and the ergonomics of seating and placement of supplies. As you can see from these the images, there is even an example of a desk that is considered unscientific management and the very wrong way to keep your workspace. The concept of a high desk to work more efficiently was also from Taylor. Every detail of work was studied to increase efficiency and improve productivity. Next slide. Taylor was involved in 2 congressional testimonies. One was to defend scientific management, and the other was to testify against the United States adopting the metric system. Taylor had studied and had been implementing scientific management at factories and corporations for close to 30 years before his seminal 1911 publication of The Principles of Scientific Management, in which he wrote that during the 30 years that he had engaged in introducing scientific management, there had not been a single strike. This would soon change after he wrote this, when on August 11th, 1911, a huge strike at the Watertown Arsenal in Massachusetts occurred. The upheaval started when scientific management was first being implemented at Watertown, and Taylor sent a colleague with a stopwatch to time workers. And the workers, who resented being watched so closely, protested in an eruption of anger and resentment. One worker was quickly fired for subordination, although later rehired, and workers walked off the job entirely in protest. The strike would last about a full week, and this protest led to organized labor getting more involved with the Taylor system. And they urged Congress to investigate scientific management, which was being partially installed in government work sectors. The Committee of Labor would embark on an investigation by a special committee directed by the House of Representatives. The testimonies would last for months, and opponents of the Taylor system were primarily workers and union leaders, such as Samuel Gompers, the president of the American Federation of Labor. Taylor made a strong case for scientific management and prepped his witnesses before they took the stand. In conclusion of the congressional testimony, the special committee concluded that scientific management could be installed, but required mutual consent with the workforce. In addition, the method of conducting time studies on workers was not permitted without the workers' consent. The report finalized by the special committee was considered a win for Taylor and his system. Previously, in 1906, while he was president of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, Taylor was asked to testify against the Lit-Hour Bill, which would have replaced the English system of inches and pounds with a metric system of meters and grams. According to Taylor, meters and millimeters were alien to men working in shops and was fiercely opposed to the metric system, which was never adopted by the United States. Next slide. To touch on the softer side of Taylor, he was an avid sportsman, and he developed a new double-handed golf club, which ended up getting banned by the National Golf Association, which means that it might have been a little too efficient, but Taylor enjoyed playing golf very much, and this original Taylor Golf Club can be viewed in the Taylor Room at the Samuel C. Williams Library. Next slide. Taylor also enjoyed tennis, and in the late 1880s, he competed in a doubles tennis match and won, which was the precursor of the US Open tennis tournament. Taylor also secured a patent for a type of tennis racket known as the spoon, and this racket is also on display in the Taylor Room at the library. Next slide. The first installments of the Taylor collection at the Samuel C. Williams Library was donated by his family in 1933 when Stevens held a celebration honoring Taylor and his impact on management and industrial engineering. The 1933 celebration was a 3-day event and attracted over 700 people to the Stevens campus, including the muckraking journalist Ida Tarbell and well-known colleague to Taylor and time motion studies expert, Lillian Gilbreth. This event was the beginning of establishing Taylor's legacy here at Stevens, and a room dedicated to Taylor in the collection donated by his family was soon established in the Lieb Library. In 2015, the library, in collaboration with the College of Arts and Letters, held an interdisciplinary conference on Taylor, which attracted scholars from as far as Greece and Australia. The Taylor collection is the most widely researched and largest archival collection that we hold in the Stevens archives. It contains correspondence, notes, journals, articles, patents, photographs, furniture, paintings, and objects. There is so much to cover in regards to Taylor, and the research on him and the Taylor system still continues to this day, with new books and articles being published on Taylor worldwide. On another note, there is a great film clip from the 1933 celebration of Taylor in the archives, which demonstrates the metal cutting tool developed by Taylor and his colleague Mansell White at Bethlehem Steel. We are working on putting that online via the digital portal, amongst other archival film media soon. So stay tuned at the end of this talk to have Ted demonstrate our digital portal to learn more. Next slide. Here is a shot of the first Taylor room that was established in the Lieb Library, and the current state of the Taylor room in the Samuel C. Williams Library. We are always happy to provide tours of the Taylor room and research appointments of the Taylor collection, but when we open back up in person to visitors again. Next slide. The next slide. Taylor generally gets most of the attention as a pioneer in management, but another Stevens alumnus, Henry Gantt, deserves to be recognized as well. Gantt graduated from Stevens in 1884, and 3 years later, when he was working as a draftsman in Baltimore, was approached by Taylor to join the engineering department at Midvale Steel, and immediately won Taylor's respect by solving a mathematical problem that had baffled Taylor himself. Gantt worked closely with Taylor and stayed at Midvale Steel until 1893, working with Taylor during the time when his crucial time studies of workers in scientific management arose. Gantt helped Taylor out with his time studies, which were used to set piece rates. Gantt helped Taylor develop the task bonus system of payment while implementing scientific management at Bethlehem Steel. Before Gantt's improvement with the system, Taylor's differential piece rate scheme penalized workers if they failed to turn out a certain number of pieces with a lower pay rate. This, of course, met with a lot of resistance from workers, but Gantt's task bonus system met with enthusiasm since the workman was assured a good wage, but could gain the opportunity to receive a bonus if their work exceeded the demands, encouraging productivity. Gantt would remain a loyal and trusted colleague to Taylor for the remainder of his life, and they corresponded frequently, as you can see from this letter in the archives from Taylor to Gantt, seeking his advice. Many scholars believe that Gantt helped Taylor humanize scientific management, and Taylor was very vocal with giving Gantt credit for this help. Next slide. Gantt is probably best known for the creation of the Gantt Chart. The first iteration of the Gantt Chart was developed by Gantt for the American Locomotive Company in 1903. The Gantt Chart is used as a project management tool and has a horizontal axis for future time and a vertical axis for work to be done. Interesting fact, in 1918, the Gantt Chart was implemented in the production of naval aircraft and in other government work that helped with the war efforts. Gantt passed away in 1919, but in 1922, Gantt's colleague Wallace Clark published a book on the Gantt chart documenting Gantt's work, and it was published in several other languages and distributed worldwide, allowing for an international audience to adopt the Gantt chart system. Next slide. Samuel Prescott Bush was born in Orange, New Jersey. He was the son of a minister and became a successful businessman and industrialist after graduating from Stevens in 1884. He was the president of Buckeye Steel Castings Company in Columbus, Ohio, and the first president of the Ohio Manufacturers Association. He is the patriarch of the Bush political family. He is the father of Prescott Bush, who was a US Senator, and the grandfather and great-grandfather of US Presidents George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. While Bush attended Stevens, he was a very active student. He pledged to the road chapter of Delta Tau Delta, and he played football and tennis. Next slide. Bush stayed connected to his alma mater through the years, which can be further represented by a letter sent from Bush to the administration at Stevens in 1947. He writes in response to a recent address given by President Davis, "The general objective of the engineer and scientist is not the selfish acquisition of wealth or personal advantage. Although in all cases he is entitled to a fair reward for his services, the status of the engineer in earlier years, somewhat less than that of other professions, has grown up to the front rank of all professions as a result of its contributions to the material welfare of mankind." Bush received an honorary degree from Stevens in 1947, just 1 year before he passed away. Next slide. Charles Stewart Mott was an engineer, entrepreneur, public servant, and philanthropist who dedicated much of his life and wealth to helping others. Mott, or CS as he was known by his friends and family, was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1875. His grandfather, Samuel Mott, started the Mott Apple Cider and Vinegar Company in 1842, which would eventually become what we now know as Mott's Apple Juice and Applesauce products. When Mott was 13 years old, he already had an interest in technical know-how and loved watching his Uncle Fred make mechanical gadgets for the family business. He entered the Stevens Preparatory High School, known as the Stevens School, in 1888, and then entered Stevens to earn his mechanical engineering degree in 1892. He would go on to graduate from Stevens in 1897 due to a year abroad in between. The year abroad was financed by his father, who sent Mott to Europe for 1 year to study yeast culture and fermentation for the family business, although the alcoholic beverages proposed for the Mott Beverage Company never really came to fruition. In Mott's final 2 years at Stevens, he excelled in his studies and was elected to an office of the Stevens Engineering Society. He did all of this while working full-time for the family business. Next slide. Mott's father expanded his business ventures over the years, which included a family bicycle manufacturing firm known as the Weston-Mott Company. In 1900, Mott started managing the Weston-Mott Company for the family and expanded the business by manufacturing wheels for automobiles. In 1906, Mott moved the company to Flint, Michigan to be close to the growing auto industry. When General Motors was formed in 1908, Mott acquired a quantity of their stock in exchange for 49% of his Weston-Mott holdings. In 1913, when Weston-Mott became the world's leading supplier of auto axles, Mott traded in the remaining 51% of his Weston-Mott stock for General Motors stock, and by 1942 was General Motors' largest stockholder. Mott was also active in GM's leadership as a corporation director and board member from 1913 until his death in the 1970s. He was also the vice president of General Motors from 1916 to 1937. And then between the years of 1912 to 1918, Mott secured 3 terms as the mayor of Flint, Michigan. During his time as mayor, he greatly contributed to Flint by improving streets, sidewalks, the sewer system, lighting, and its fire department. Next slide. Mott stayed connected to his alma mater through the years and was a member of the Board of Trustees at Stevens and was the finance and investment chairman of the board. In 1945, Mott donated funds to Stevens to construct the Mott Field House. The need for an additional structure during the war efforts was emphasized as an additional 500 Navy students were enrolled for an accelerated program in technical training at Stevens. The Mott Field House would help accommodate this campus need and was constructed where Schaefer Gym is now located. The Mott Field House contained an enclosed drill and exercise field with dressing rooms and showers. This photo shows Mott with Stevens president, Dr. Harvey Davis, and Mott's family members dedicating the Mott Field House in 1947. Next slide. The Mott Foundation was founded in 1926 and focused on funding opportunities for research, education, and improved health in the local communities, especially for children in need. Over the years, the Mott Foundation would give back billions of dollars in the areas of education, health, and the environment, and continues to actively fund grants in these areas. Mott acquired a great amount of wealth and status during his lifetime, but he strongly believed in giving back, which he did through his foundation. Mott passed away in 1973 at the age of 97. This book by Ed Renahan was recently published, and it's a more in-depth biography on Mott, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in learning more about his interesting life. Next slide. Hazeltine graduated from Stevens in 1906, and after working for General Electric from 1906 to 1907, he returned to Stevens to begin a long and influential career as a researcher and professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering, becoming the department chair in 1917. While serving as a consultant for the US Navy during World War I, Hazeltine designed a circuit for use in radio receivers that eliminated the various shrieks, squelches, and groans that plagued radio broadcasts at the time. In 1922, he secured a patent for this device called the Nutridyne. When it was introduced to the public in 1923, the Nutridyne offered a clearer, less distorted signal that helped usher in a golden age of commercial radio broadcasting. Later on, Hazeltine formed the Hazeltine Corporation, which would go on to play a major role in the development of radio, television, color television, and other areas of electronic innovation in the early 1920s. Hazeltine rented out office space in the former Navy building, currently the site of the Babio Center, to manage the licenses and provide engineering support for the Hazeltine Corporation. By 1927, it was estimated that 10 million radio receivers used Hazeltine's technology. Next slide. In 1937, Hazeltine was recognized by the Radio Club of America and awarded a medal for his contributions to radio communication. But to understand the great impact of Hazeltine is to understand the enormous impact he left with all the Stevens students that he interacted with when he was a professor. Hazeltine was affectionately known by his students as Professor Hazy, and some described him as the grandest man I have ever known. There were 2 key facets of his character that stood out. One, his genius as an expert witness in court, explaining very complex technology to non-technical judges. And 2, his inspiring and lovable personality. Next slide. Before he was a world-renowned artist, Alexander Calder, known as Sandy to his friends and family, was a student at Stevens where he played on the football and lacrosse teams, was a member of the Delta Tau Delta fraternity, and served on the honor board until his graduation in 1919. Calder's challenging coursework at Lowell High School in San Francisco prepared him well for Stevens. He was living out west with his family in his teenage years, who are well-known artists in their own right. His father, Sterling, and his grandfather, Alexander, were both accomplished sculptors, and his mother, Nanette, was a professional portrait artist. His unconventional family was pleased when he sought a more conventional path of engineering, since they knew all too well how a life in the arts could be unstable. Next slide. Calder was well liked on campus, and he was known to have a warm, childlike deportment and was a constant presence at campus events. Calder's best friends at Stevens were Bob Trube and Bill Drew. Bob Trube sadly passed away at the young age of 31, but Bill Drew remained close friends with Calder until his passing in 1976. Bill Drew was Calder's best man at his wedding in 1931, and he helped the Calders secure their down payment for their property in Roxbury, Connecticut years later. When Bill Drew and his widow passed away, they had 10 original works by Calder in their estate. Bill Drew introduced him to the fraternity Delta Tau Delta. After starting his first year, he successfully pledged to be a Delt and then moved into the Delt house to live with his new brothers. He was sad though, because he had to leave the nice tower room in Castle Stevens, which had just been made into dormitory space 4 years earlier, but had a real companionship with his Delt buddies. He always felt honored to have become a Delt, and many years later in the 1970s, when he came across a gallery assistant who was also a Delt, he eagerly shared the secret handshake with them. Next slide. By his own admission, Calder wasn't much of an athlete, but was on the Stevens football and lacrosse teams nonetheless. He was much better at lacrosse, a sport that he really took to and where the coach actually played him. The same could not be said of football. The coach didn't play him once during the season. Even after graduating from Stevens in 1919, Calder followed the Stevens lacrosse team years later, even writing back to his sister Margaret on the West Coast to express how pleased he was that the team was doing well. Next slide, please. While at Stevens, Calder excelled at mathematics and applied kinetics, two courses he enjoyed immensely. He also was the only student during that time to earn 100% in descriptive geometry. His success in applied kinetics is what really stands out though, and as his biographer Jed Pearl states, it's difficult to imagine a college course that could have shaped Calder's later artistic concerns more profoundly. When Calder graduated from Stevens, he briefly worked as an engineer, but his heart was never really in it. He loved making things, but had no interest in managerial roles, which most Stevens grads would embark on soon after graduation. In 1923, Calder started taking classes at the Art Student League in New York City and would secure a position as an illustrator for the National Police Gazette. In 1926, Calder moved to Paris and embraced the artistic career path that was always meant for him. In 1943, his first major retrospective exhibition was held at the MoMA in New York City. And Calder has permanent collections currently at the Whitney Museum and the Guggenheim in New York City. Stevens has two original works by Calder, both of which are on permanent display at the Samuel C. Williams Library. Both pieces were donated by Calder in 1969 when he received an honorary degree at Stevens. Next slide. John Blandford Jr. He's described in the 1919 Link Yearbook as one of the livest wires that ever hung from a trolley. John Blandford is always bubbling over with enthusiasm and pepper. That determined spirit led him into a long and brilliant career in public administration. Blandford worked under 3 US presidents, Herbert Hoover, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Harry S. Truman. Under Presidents Hoover and Roosevelt, Blandford was a member of the President's Emergency Committee for Employment. He then moved over to a position with the Tennessee Valley Authority under Roosevelt, an economic development program started during the Great Depression. Blandford was a reliable advisor, and he even worked for more than one organization at a time. From 1939 until 1941, he worked for the Bureau of Budget and then went on to work for the National Housing Agency. Next slide. Here's a great photo with Blandford when he was working for the National Housing Agency in the 1940s, courtesy of the National Archives. Next slide. At the end of World War II, Blandford turned his efforts to international concerns. He worked as a consultant to President Harry Truman on the Marshall Plan, which was a World War II recovery program that provided aid to Europe. And in 1946, he was awarded the Medal of Merit by President Truman. And we have that original letter to Blandford and signed by Truman in the archives. Under the United Nations, Blandford worked in China, Greece, Iran, and Lebanon. He also was the director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees from 1951 to 1953. The travel souvenirs that we have in the archives from Blandford are from these travels as a UN diplomat. Next slide. We don't have much else in regards to professional personal papers of Blandford in the archives, but there is an extensive archival collection on Blandford's career in the Presidential Library of Harry S. Truman, managed by the National Archives. I'd love to go through this collection myself and learn more about him someday soon. Next slide. James Braxton graduated from Stevens in 1937. During his undergraduate days, he held a 4-year Edgar B. Bacon Scholarship and participated in numerous social and professional activities, which included involvement with the Stewart, the Glee Club, and the Dramatic Society. He was elected to the Tau Beta Pi fraternity and was also on the Dean's List. He also became a member of the Jersey City chapter of Alpha Pi Alpha, the historically first African-American fraternity in North America, which has included famous members such as Martin Luther King Jr. and W.E.B. Du Bois. The first Alpha Pi Alpha chapter was officially charted at Stevens in the beginning of 2019. Next slide. James Braxton grew up in Jersey City, and before entering Stevens, he was fascinated by the construction of the Holland Tunnel, which was built during the 1920s and officially opened in 1927. He would cut and save all newspaper articles on the Holland Tunnel that he came across. And we happen to have this great collection on the Holland Tunnel here in the archives that includes great images of the construction. And now that I know that this project was a source of inspiration for Mr. Braxton, I keep thinking how much he would enjoy looking through these images and documents. I was recently able to connect with his widow and other living relatives, and I've been able to develop an ongoing relationship with the Braxton family and learn much more about his life by acquiring a new archival collection from his family members, which documents much more of his life story. This new accession to the archives has added an extra dimension to his inspiring life and provides valuable context into his personal story, allowing future generations to learn more about his legacy. Most of the images and information that I'm sharing in his segment are from this recent archival collection. Next slide. After graduating from Stevens in 1937, Braxton applied for a competitive position as the managing engineer to install a new heating plant at Atlanta University. People were still feeling the effects of the Great Depression, but he was able to secure a great engineering position and spent 4 years in Atlanta. While there, he had an active social life and would talk about having dinner with W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a professor at Atlanta University at that time. Next slide. After Atlanta, Braxton held positions as chief engineer for a general contracting firm and as an instructor at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And he oversaw the construction of war housing projects in Baltimore and in the D.C. area. In 1945, he entered Harvard University and was awarded a Julius Rosenwald Fellowship for Graduate Studies in Regional Planning. He earned the Master of City Planning degree from Harvard Graduate School of Design in 1947. Next slide. After graduating from Harvard, Braxton moved into a new phase of his career. He was led by his lifelong passion to design and manufacture low-cost housing systems and provide better affordable housing options to low-income communities. This interest was first documented during his time in Atlanta when he started to photograph housing in Black communities. In 1950, he started a new position as the supervising senior planner at the Chicago Housing Authority. And Chicago would become his new home until he passed away at the age of 101 in 2015. In 1965, he assumed the position of Assistant Chief Engineer with the Metropolitan Sanitary District of Greater Chicago. A year later, Martin Luther King Jr. would move his family out to Chicago in an effort to bring his movement up north to urban cities dealing with issues of segregation and discrimination. Braxton would march with Dr. King in 1966 in Chicago and stayed engaged with the civil rights movement. He also marched in the Million Man March in DC in 1995. Braxton continued his dream of producing reduced cost housing systems, and later in his career, he created his own company called Braxton Inc. and secured a patent for a system of manufactured housing that can be assembled by unskilled labor with a minimum of training and cost. Next slide. In 1987, Mr. Braxton returned to Stevens to receive an honorary degree and was quoted talking about this system. He said, "Last year, I obtained a US patent on a systems approach to housing construction. Although this system will permit construction of any type of building anywhere, the shortage of affordable housing and the presence of so many unemployed in the inner city make it an attractive starting place. I believe that a properly designed housing system, such as the one I am developing, erected by semi-skilled workers, could cut the cost of decent housing by a factor of 1/3 to 1/2. Braxton was in his 70s when his patent for affordable housing systems was created and never received the proper attention it should have, but his research and development into housing improvements is well documented and has helped pave the way for future affordable housing projects. As we are receiving more archival material on Braxton, we are learning more and more. I feel like I've only been able to touch on his life today, but I hope to have a more in-depth article on Braxton and his inspirational career in life in the near future as we learn more with the new archival collection. Next slide. Beatrice Hicks has a long list of achievements, which began in 1939 when she became the first woman to earn a bachelor's degree in engineering from Newark College, now called NJIT. She was inspired to become an engineer when she witnessed the construction of the Empire State Building and the George Washington Bridge. Hicks was the first woman to be hired as an engineer at Western Electric Company. And while an engineer at the Newark Controls Company, she pioneered the design, development, and manufacturing of pressure and gas density switches, a key component of controlled systems using artificial atmospheres. Her patent of the gas density switch was secured in 1955 and eventually used in the space program. Before her success with this patent, she attended Stevens and completed a master's in science in 1949. Years of professional achievement brought Dr. Hicks many honors, including the National Academy of Engineering Award in 1978, Woman of the Year in Business Award in 1952, the Newark College of Engineering Alumni Award in 1961, the Society of Women Engineers Achievement Award in 1963, and honorary degrees from Hobart and William Smith Colleges in 1958, and RPI in 1965. She was also the director of the first International Conference of Women in Engineering and Science in 1964, and the co-founder and first president of the Society of Women Engineers. Beatrice Hicks greatly advanced the status and opportunities for women in engineering. She received an honorary degree at Stevens in 1978, 1 year before she passed away at the young age of 60. Next slide. Women did enter Stevens at some capacity during the 1940s due to the war effort. The War Industries Training Program was first established in 1940, and by the spring of 1942, women were admitted into some of the courses. In 1942, there were 39 women admitted to the program in a full-time capacity, and 28 were part-time students. In 1941, President Harvey Davis gave a speech which foreshadowed the entrance of women to Stevens during this time period. He stated that in continuing special defense training, we are confronted by a condition, not a theory. Positions have so attracted boys that there is no longer a reservoir of them available to be trained in such pre-employment courses as have been given in our defense industry school. It is not clear whether applications will be sufficient to warrant continuance of the school along present lines. We may have to redefine our whole defense training program. Most of the women admitted to Stevens during the 1940s attended the accelerated technical program that was offered, but many others were able to get advanced degrees in science during this period when the rules changed due to the circumstances. Thankfully, Dr. Beatrice Hicks was one of these women. Next slide. All right. Getting towards the end, we have so much to cover when it comes to talking about inspiring alumni in Stevens history. So we would like to split these lectures into parts, as I mentioned earlier. If there is an interest, we can do a part 2 of this lecture at a later date, focusing on other great stories not discussed today due to our time limit. In the meantime, stay safe and don't try this at home, whatever this is. Next slide. Just to close the talk, I wanted to play this brief clip from Elizabeth Gobile. She graduated in 1983, and she talks about the first job she got right after graduating Stevens.
My first job was Con Edison, and they were on strike. So I got my letter, okay, show up, and they're on strike, so don't go to Con Ed, go to the Roosevelt Hotel. I went there. They took me to a trailer and said, here, because we're on strike, you have to go, you have, where was I? Brooklyn Navy Yard is where you're going to go. Here's a hard hat, a pair of steel-toed boots, pack your bag, and you're going to go sleep there till the strike's over. So the first 3 months, I slept in a power plant in Brooklyn. And I still have my hard hat and my steel-toed shoes that I remember when my daughter was little, who, like I said, just graduated in May. Yeah. She went downstairs and was like, oh, look at this hard hat and shoes. This must be Dad's. And I'm like, nope, it was mine. And that was my first, and even now after having children, and I took off a little bit, I consulted some, but I did something totally different. Now I'm doing pharmaceuticals, but because I went to Stevens, they knew the diverse background. And from being an engineer, they're like, we'll hire you. We know you can do something different or whatever because of your education and your background. So it's been, nobody has any trouble asking me or to be on some committee because, the engineering, they always feel like you're a problem solver, you're a doer, you're a project leader. So I think because of that, it's never been, oh, can she or should she or whatever. Like I said, even this, it's like on the spot, whatever you want, whatever the job, you're a Stevens engineer. Yeah, so we'd love to have you.
Right now, I guess time for questions and answers.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Leah. At this time, we welcome you to share any questions you may have using the Q&A tool. Questions will be collected and posed to our speaker in just a moment. After the Q&A, if you would like to stick around for just a few moments, Ted Hotelling will give a brief tour of the new digital collections portal we recently launched for archives and special collections content. And with that, we will begin our Q&A. So, Leah, the first question we have is, Positive feedback. This was definitely of interest. And will you be assembling a presentation for Alumni Weekend?
We don't have a presentation for Alumni Weekend, but we do have a quiz. And you can win a prize, I believe, for the virtual Alumni Weekend coming up. And if you attended these lectures, you should get 100% on that quiz.
That's great. That's great. And who knows, maybe we'll speak with Michelle and see what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay, great. There was a comment that the fraternity is Alpha Phi Alpha, so we can look into that for also for the, yeah, so that's really helpful for us to know as well, and we'll definitely make a note of that.
Yeah, my apologies if I mispronounced.
Okay, great, great. And let's see, we also have feedback that it's great presentation, Leah, and looking forward to the next part. And a couple of other positive feedback comments. Great job. Let's see. At this time, there are no other questions. Are there any other questions? Take your time if you are still typing. I feel like there's a lot of questions I made notes of too, so I'll have to get some time with you at some point later.
Okay, sure.
We have one question. Did both Taylor and Gantt die of the flu, and when?
That is a really good question.
Yeah, definitely.
Taylor did die of the flu, but in 1915, so I don't know if it was from, related to the big breakout that happened around that time, because he did pass away of influenza, but a little bit earlier than, the 1918 Spanish flu breakout. Gantt, I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little more research to find out, because they both died pretty young. So, and Taylor seemed really healthy, like he played sports. He was only in his 50s when he passed away. So it was kind of surprising when he got sick and passed away in 1915.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment that Frederick Winslow Taylor was a member of Theta Xi. I don't know if you came across that in your research.
I didn't, mainly he didn't spend much time on campus at Stevens. And so he was one of the first remote students, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so his participation on campus events isn't documented really in the archives. Like he's not even he's in the commencement program, but he's not listed in the yearbook. So there's things like that happens where usually alumni are in the yearbook and you can see what events they went to in some ways, but he only came to campus maybe, 3 times a year to take exams.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
We have another question. Can you tell us a little bit about Mrs. Braxton?
Yes, Mrs. Virginia Braxton. Her and James Braxton got married in 1980. And she was his second wife, and she has put me in contact with other relatives of James Braxton, and she has been donating amazing material to the archives to preserve the legacy of James Braxton. I feel like I'm still learning more and more about him and his life. Virginia is amazing. She lives out in California right now, and I talk to her almost once a week.
Wow.
We've become friends, yeah, and I'm learning a lot from her. And she's actually writing her own biography on James Braxton.
Wow. Yeah, I know you've spoken so fondly of her. So it's neat that you're both you're from California, so that's neat that you have that connection. We do have another question. When was the Alumni Association founded, and were all these guys and gals members? I don't know. Do you have that answer?
It was founded in 1876, I believe. Ted, correct me if I'm wrong about that. I think almost all of these alums were members of the Alumni Association, except for Taylor. I don't know if he was a member. Like he kind of, he seemed like he was just like, I'm going to go to school, get what I need to get done, and just start, working. Like he wasn't as interested in keeping in contact, even though his family members were very much interested in keeping in contact with Stevens, which is why we have such an amazing archival collection on Taylor. But everyone else, Mott, Bush, all of them, not Beatrice Hicks though. Again, like she, the women that attended, Stevens in the 1940s, there's not really any record of them. You just know that they graduated. We don't have any photos of her. The photo that we got, we used in this presentation is from Wayne State University, who has an amazing archival collection on the Society of Women Engineers. But we don't have a lot of documentation on her being at Stevens, and I don't have any record that she was a member of the Alumni Association, but everyone else probably was, yeah.
Leah, I can confirm that the Alumni Association was founded in 1876.
Okay, I'm right.
Good memory. Thank you. Okay, we have a question. What math problem did Gantt solve for Taylor?
I don't know. They don't mention the actual math problem. I would love to know that, though. But Taylor definitely, he really trusted Gantt. Like there's so much correspondence in the Taylor collection, and they wrote each other all the time. They were in constant communication, and he really trusted Gantt, and he asked him for advice all the time. So I thought it was just kind of a cool connection, because I do think Gantt sometimes gets overshadowed by Taylor, because he did graduate from Stevens. People know about him, but Taylor gets kind of all the glory in some ways.
That's great. Okay, we have a question about the archives. What additional work is underway to grow the archives at Stevens?
More outreach to families such as, the Braxton family. I wouldn't know so much about James Braxton if I hadn't been able to reach out to the Braxton family and just get to know them and build a relationship. So we're always doing more outreach, and we want more documentation of alumni, of campus life, and things like that. Besides that, we're doing more, we're accessioning more digital records for sure. Since, student groups on campus now, and since everything's virtual, we're taking in more electronic records in many ways. But we're always kind of looking at where we have maybe gaps in the history where we don't have documentation, and looking at ways that we can help fill those gaps. I mean, the Voices of Castle Point project kind of was started because of that. We were realizing we didn't have a lot of documentation of the first women that came to Stevens in the archives. And so just talking to them and getting their stories recorded is also a way to help fill those gaps as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly oral history is a great way to capture people's memories. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important for the institutional memory of the university to keep gathering these. And I know that you and Ted make it a priority to keep that outreach going strong. So thank you for that. We have one question about the number of attendees for today. I think for me, I was keeping an eye on that. I think we had 50 and we still have about 44. So it's wonderful. We're so excited that there's a lot of interest in these lectures that you're giving. We have a question. Are scans of old links and students available online?
We have a lot of the Stutes digitized. We're trying to make more of them available online. And this is a good transition to the digital portal demonstration. Yeah. We don't have that many links digitized yet. We would love to get that whole collection digitized and available online, especially those early links. Some of them are also in very fragile condition. And so looking at the physical copies is, can be a little bit cumbersome. So we would love to, it's not just a preservation effort, but it's like we want to make it more accessible to everyone. So we're still working on that. We're hoping to get, more of them up, in this coming year for sure.
Right, for sure. Because certainly the nature of paper, it can, the preservation efforts are certainly hampered by time and yeah, other environmental conditions, right? Sure. So it's a fight against time, and I know that you're constantly thinking about that. So that's wonderful. We have a question. Do you have a collection of senior handbooks?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I think we might have all the senior handbooks that came out. So that's a great collection. So. Because I don't know, I can't remember exactly when they stopped, but they started at a certain time and then stopped a certain year. But yeah, we do have that collection.
Yeah. I always enjoy the collection of the graduate, like the graduating class, and sort of, I guess they would present these books to companies that were hiring. What were those called, Leah? Do you remember I can't remember what they were called, but I loved looking through those. It's sort of like upon graduation, there would be a book circulated, and you could see the different graduates' accomplishments and what they were interested in doing. Those were really interesting. I've seen some from the 1940s, I believe.
Yeah, I know you're talking about. I can't remember the formal name of that though.
Yeah, for sure. Something to look up when we get back to campus.
Yeah,
for sure. So many things. So it looks like that's the end of our queue. Actually, we have one more question. Do you have a collection of posters?
We have some posters in the archives. Trying to think of exactly posters of events or just we don't have that many event posters. We have like some ephemera, like flyers and things like that. I think some of the posters we have might even be from, I know we have some posters in a faculty collection that just more of a personal thing that they kept. And then, you know, we had some kind of World War II posters, I believe, from someone, but they were reproductions, they weren't originals. So we're also still, just to let people know, we're still going through our backlog of collections in many ways, and it takes time to process everything. So there might be a lot of things in our collections that we don't know we have yet. So, which is sort of exciting too.
Right. You never know what you're going to discover in a box that you haven't been able to go through yet. So it's just never ending work, really. It's pretty amazing and very rewarding when you come across something really fascinating, I'm sure. We have a question. This person said that they would love to see a webinar session focused on Stevens women engineers. So that's definitely something we should add to the list for lectures, future lectures.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah.
Great. And we have another question. Are there copies of old exams?
There are some actually kind of mixed into the collection when we've had maybe alumni donate certain papers of their time at Stevens. There might be an exam in there as well. But it's not something we generally have a lot of though. Yeah. Nothing recent either. So.
Right. We have one comment, and I'm wondering if this is related to what I had mentioned about the senior booklet of the class of 1971 was the title on one of them. So that might be the senior booklet that I was mentioning earlier. So thank you so much for that comment. Okay, great. We have one comment that Frederick Winslow Taylor died March 21st, 1915 of pneumonia per the One Best Way by Robert Canigal, which is a book that I know.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
You know, I've seen different accounts of how he died, but I would trust Robert Canigal for that. Yeah.
Right. He spent a lot of time in the archives here years ago when he was writing that book, right?
Yes, he did actually. And we've been talking to him about donating his research papers on Taylor to the archives as well, which would be exciting to have. But yeah, his biography on Taylor is definitely the more definitive one for sure.
It's really exciting. Maybe we can get him to speak at Stevens someday. That would be great. Yeah. There is a question, do we have any t-shirts in the collection, and would we like the first 10 years of Boken t-shirts?
Oh, yeah, I know exactly that event. It happened mainly in the 1980s, I believe. And yeah, I would love that. We have some t-shirts and clothing in the collection. So that would be great because we don't have any of those t-shirts, I know, in the archives.
Okay, great. We have, and I think I even have a few Boken t-shirts. One of my favorite t-shirts, I wear it all the time. It's got a station wagon on it and it's got a map on the back. It's really awesome. So I think it's from early 2000s. So we have another comment, that confirmation that was called the senior booklet. So we have, so that's great. So we'll have to take a look at those when we're back together.
Oh yeah, because we have a collection of the senior booklets, but yeah, in the archives.
We also have a question, what are the senior handbooks? What are they?
We have the freshman handbook. Is that what maybe they're thinking of? Because we have freshman handbooks that started around early 1900s and ended, you know, maybe early 2000s or something. But then there's the senior booklets, as you guys have mentioned, which were handed out at the end of, you know, the year for graduation, I believe. So. Great. But I don't know about a senior handbook. Is that what you mentioned?
I'm not sure. If that person can maybe clarify the question, that would be great. And then we can make sure we're answering it properly. In the meantime, I will ask the next question. Do we have a copy of the 1918 link? That is the year this person's father, Samson Broadwin, graduated with Alexander Calder. So do we have a copy of 1918, 1919?
We do. Yeah,
Okay.
we have the full run of the Link yearbooks available in the physical archives. We haven't digitized that copy yet. We should digitize it, in the near future, because that's, of course, because that's a popular year for like Calder graduated. Then it gets used all the time. So, yeah.
Right.
But we have like a few copies of each of those.
Okay, that's great. And we also have confirmation that the senior booklets were used for prospective employers. So that's what they were used for.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting. I could see that.
Yes, okay, that's confirmation. Do we have a question? We have a question about, do we have materials, maybe posters on activities at Stevens, such as the Beatnik Fiasco Dance Concert?
Oh, that does not ring any bells.
That would be great though if we did.
I would love to have that. I haven't seen anything like that in the archives. I mean, again, like we do have some flyers and maybe like smaller posters that are kind of, that are in the archives for events and things like that. I haven't come across anything like that. So if we do come across it, or if someone wants to donate that poster, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly. We would love to have that as an acquisition. Yeah, for sure. That would be amazing. So I think at this time that looks like all the questions. So I think we will welcome Ted Hotaling to give us a brief tour of the new digital collections portal. And I think everyone will enjoy seeing how to navigate these. And so I will turn it over to Ted. And thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Hey, everybody. My name is Ted Hotaling. I'm the archivist and digital projects librarian here at the library. And thanks for sticking around after that really insightful presentation. That was great. And I'm very excited to give a very brief overview of this new portal for archives and special collections content. And this new site serves as a kind of a one-stop shop that consolidates everything from our digitized manuscripts, photographs, exhibitions, oral histories, as well as lectures like these, all on one website. So you can write down the URL in the slide here, but the easiest way to get there is to visit the library's homepage at library.stevens.edu. So let's go take a look. Oops. All right, so this is the library's website, and all you have to do is go to Archives and Special Collections and then click Digital Collections here. And I'll quickly show you the different sections before we get into the photograph and manuscript collections. So we'll start with, and by the way, if you ever want to chat with a librarian, this is also a very easy way to chat with someone. You can just go on the library's website. A little pop-up will come up, say, ask if you want to speak to a librarian. They're always happy to help with research questions, archives questions, anything like that. So feel free to make use of that as well. All right, so we'll start with virtual Stevens history. All right, so this page collects our lectures, documentaries, and other virtual events and projects that we have planned for the future. So we provided a link to this really fascinating documentary on Colonel John Stevens and his sons, Richard, John, and Edwin. Edwin being the founder of Stevens Institute of Technology, and their groundbreaking research into steam-powered transportation in the 1800s. And there's also this history of Castle Stevens from when it was the home for the Stevens family in the 1800s up until 1959, when it was torn down to make room for the Stevens Center, which was later rededicated as the Wesley J. House Center. This documentary was produced by John Dalton and the late, great Richard Reeves and other members of the class of 1960. And it's really, really worth watching and has a lot of great remembrances from those who really considered Castle Stevens to be the soul of the campus for students and alumni. So in addition to that, we also have the lectures that we've been doing over the last month or so. So there's the one that Leah did, was the first 100 years, a brief history of Stevens. And then the one that she and I did earlier this month on the history of Stevens traditions. And we'll also add this one to this page as soon as it's ready to be uploaded. And here is our exhibitions page. And so far we have 3 exhibitions on the site now, and we plan on producing one on the history of Stevens athletics, one on student traditions. But right now we have a sort of a greatest hits of the archives. It's a slideshow at the top that has about 200 images. There's the history of Stevens Library exhibit, which coincided with the 50th anniversary of the Samuel C. Williams Library. And also an exhibit on the life and times of John W. Lieb, another pretty influential alumnus from Stevens who graduated in 1880 and went on to work for Thomas Edison. So I'm not gonna go through each one, but a lot of these were produced in person in the library. So because some of you can't come to the library, we wanted to sort of make these accessible to everybody remotely. So yeah, definitely check those out. There's also the Voices from Castle Point Oral History Project, which Leah mentioned and has been maintaining in order to document the lives and achievements of Stevens alumni. And I'll also, I'll assume that she's interviewed some of you in the audience for this. So, and if she hasn't, feel free to reach out to her, as you know, we're always looking to add more stories and voices to this really great project. But we'll mainly focus on our site for digitized photographs and manuscripts. And as you can see here, we have 7 collections available for viewing, and there's over 1,500 items that have been uploaded so far. And we plan to add more in the coming year. And somebody mentioned the Stewart collection. Yes, we do have the Stewart collection. We have everything from 1904 to 1950 here. So let's see. And just so you're aware, a lot of the digitized stuff that we put online through these different sites, it kind of represents like a drop in the bucket of what we have in our physical collections. So if there's something that you see here, something you want to know more about, or if you have questions about something you don't see, please reach out to us. We love any kind of archival detective work, and we love talking with researchers and curious alumni. So please reach out to us. And we thought it would be helpful to do a very brief demonstration to show you how to navigate this particular site, because I know it can be kind of clunky if you don't know some of the tricks. So since we're on the subject of alumni, and since Leah gave a great overview of his life, let's start with our largest collection, the Frederick Winslow Taylor collection. So just click the thumbnail here. And again, what you see on the site is a fraction of the total physical collection. The Taylor collection, as Leah mentioned, is our largest archival collection and most used collection, and it numbers over 200 linear feet of material. So it's quite sizable. So let's browse the collection. And each collection has its own landing page right here. So it has an accompanying description. And we're working to link our archival finding aids to this page so that we can provide an overview of what's available online and what's available in the physical archives. We kind of want to cover both for researchers who want to explore this collection. So we'll click the browse button below to get started. And here you're given an itemized list of all 1,285 items within this particular collection. And Leah mentioned it covers a lot. There's photographs, there's manuscripts, there's handwritten correspondence, there's diary entries, there's all sorts of really, really wonderful stuff in here. And they're listed alphabetically by title. So you could just click through this list and see what looks interesting to you. But if you know what you're looking for, the easiest way to start is to search by subject, much in the same way that you would with an academic database. So on the left here, you'll see a list of subject terms. So let's see what we have for the Tabor Manufacturing Company, which was a molding machinery plant in Philadelphia. And it was the site of one of the first full demonstrations of scientific management in a factory setting. So the date range for these items is about 1903 to about 1915, and it's a mixture of glass plate photographs and manuscripts. So Leah already showed you some of the photos from this collection, but there are some really great materials here that meticulously document Taylor's implementation of time motion study and waste reduction, and even the optimal arrangement of furniture and equipment on the factory floor to kind of squeeze every last drop of productivity from the workforce. So let's see here. Let's start with this photo right here. And you can navigate different pages up here, and you just click the title or the thumbnail to view the item. So this is a glass plate photograph that was kind of a commonly used photographic medium that was used in like the mid 1800s to about the early 20th century. And what we see here is an efficiency manager, or a speed boss, as they were called. And the speed boss worked on the factory floor and trained workers to follow these guidelines to remove wasteful steps from the production process. And instruction cards would be placed near workers' stations so that they could follow along as they learned this radical new process of efficiency. So let's go back here. Sometimes it takes just a little bit of time to load. And here's what these instruction cards would look like. And as you can see, they could get pretty specific, where every little step was broken down and translated into how many seconds or minutes it would take. So there's even a step, as you can see here, like we'll go full screen on it. There's a step for changing the card. There's a step for studying the instruction card. There's a step for putting assembling the drill bits, raising and lowering the arm on the machinery, changing the feed, changing the speed, and then how many seconds each step would take, and then tallying it up the total amount of time it would take to complete this whole process. Pretty radical stuff. And we recently uploaded about 400 glass plate lantern slides to this collection. So if you want to just see more of these types of photographs within the collection, you can go down to the item description, and you can click under subject, you can click lantern slides. And this gives you a list of 409 lantern slides within the Taylor collection. And a lot of these scans for this particular collection, the Taylor collection, were cataloged back in 2011, but we're currently in the middle of recataloging this entire collection. So we want to make it more accessible and easier to navigate by better and more specific subject terms. And since Leah mentioned Henry Gantt, can show you some materials that we have on him. So the way that you can do that is you can either search up here in the toolbar, or if you go back to the main Taylor page, you can actually see him under subject terms. So let's see what we have. So here's some stuff that we have on Gantt right here. So let's type in Henry Gantt. So we have some lantern slides of him. We have some letters, correspondence written between Taylor and Gantt. There's a lot of great stuff in here, but I just wanted to briefly show you that, just to show that you can search by subject, by author, and all of that can go up here in the top right corner, the advanced search toolbar. So I'll also mention that the collection contains a number of unpublished manuscripts and drafts handwritten by Taylor as he was developing these theories, but there's also letters from Upton Sinclair, the author of The Jungle, who obviously was highly critical of Taylor's perceived anti-labor practices. And there's even some correspondence with the first two presidents of Stevens, and some Stevens faculty members even make an appearance. One of them is Alfred C. Kinsey. And if the name rings a bell, Professor Kinsey was the former head of the Department of Shop Instruction here at Stevens, and was in fact the father of the more well-known Alfred C. Kinsey, who you may know as the co-author of the Kinsey Reports, the groundbreaking study of sexual behavior in men and women that was published in the mid-20th century. And not too many people know this, but Kinsey, the son, actually attended Stevens for 2 years, but dropped out against his father's wishes because he wanted to be a biologist, not an engineer. So, so the rest is history. And we don't have time to go too in depth with a lot of the stuff here, but needless to say, this collection is really worth exploring on your own. There's some really fascinating materials in here, especially if you're a labor studies scholar, or if you just have a general interest in the relationship between technology and industry in 20th century America, because as Leah said in her presentation, Taylor was right there in the center of that history, and his influence was and continues to be huge. So we're pretty lucky to have this collection at Stevens. So the last collection I'll show you is the Stevens Life collection. And if you want to return to the main homepage for this site, you can click anywhere on the top portion in the banner image, and it'll bring you back to the main site. So we'll go to Stevens Life. And the Stevens Life was the first literary magazine published by Stevens students, and it lasted from 1890 to the end of 1899. So this is well before Events magazine in the 1950s, 1970s, which some of you may be familiar with. Before Anna to Die in the 1970s, 1980s, and before Redshift, the current magazine for creative expression here. But this collection provides a pretty unique glimpse into extracurricular life at Stevens during this time, what students were interested in, how they expressed themselves, and there's some really cool stuff. So I'll briefly demonstrate how to do keyword searching and browsing within individual issues, because this also applies to the Stewart collection. Any kind of heavily text-based collection that's been OCR'd, or optical character recognition. But I'll also mention that the Stewart collection, as I said, is available. We have every issue from 1904 to 1950 available here on the site. And like the Stewart collection, this collection is arranged chronologically by volume. And to make it easier to navigate these collections, as I mentioned, each page was scanned and embedded with optical character recognition, which allows you to type in any word in the search bar, and it'll give you a list of results for that particular keyword in the collection. So you can search whatever topic you're interested in, and it'll give you like a list of hits on that particular subject. So we'll click Browse here. And as some of you may know, Stevens once had a varsity football team and played in the same league as Columbia, Yale, and Princeton as early as 1872. So this collection provides some really great accounts of the games that were played in the 1890s, and describes some of the rivalries that we had with other colleges in the area, particularly Princeton and Rutgers. So let's do a keyword search for football. So you just type it in here in the top right corner, and this will show us every mention of the word football within this collection. And over here on the left-hand side, you can see that we have the Stevens Life selected, but if you wanted to expand the search to other collections, just select that collection and then click Update. So if we wanted to search both the Stevens Life collection and the Stewart collection, click that, click Update. So now we're getting hits from Stevens Life and the Stute. And if you wanted to search across all collections, just click Select All Collections, Update. And now we're getting hits from all over. And if we wanted to search specifically in another collection, the athletics collection, which has some really good photos, then we just click Stevens Athletics Collection. So there's some great photos of the varsity football team here from 1906. There's another one from an intramural football team, the class of 1897. But we'll just focus on one issue of the Stevens life from October 22nd, 1891. So let's take a look there. Okay, so once we go into the volume, there's going to be a list of the issues within that volume. And once you find one that you like, just click it and then click expand to go full screen. All right. And the way to search within an individual issue is you use the Find and Document button, and that's this magnifying glass right here in the top. So once you're in the PDF viewer, just click Find and Document, and we're looking to do some research on football. So we'll just type in football. And so that you can use these different arrows to cycle through the document. And as you can see here, it'll show you every mention of football within this issue. There's one about the football convention. So this issue provides an interesting account of Stevens's attempt to get back into the Eastern Intercollegiate Football Association after being refused admission that previous year. So apparently Williams College, who presided over the conference, didn't want us in for whatever reason. But with the help of student representatives from Amherst and MIT, of all places, we were able to get back in. And you can see here what teams we were scheduled to play later that year. So if we go to the next page, it gives you a very brief outline of what the football schedule was that year. And it even gives an account of a game that we played against New York University on October 14th, 1891. And you can use the zoom feature too, which is right here in the center if you want to get a little closer. But there's also annual accounts of the calculus cremation and the rush game festivities, which I talked about in the last lecture. So if you keep going through the document, there's some really great photos of the cane rush. So this collection is a really great resource, and I'm sure there's plenty we still don't know about because frankly, we don't have the time to read every issue as much as we would like to. So we're gonna have to rely on you all to tell us all the interesting stuff that you come across as you explore these collections, and we do want to hear from you. So anytime you want to go back, you can exit the PDF viewer here. And if you want to go back to the main page, just click the banner here at the top. All right. And like I said, you'll use the same search methods for the Stute collection or student newspaper. We have the full run of the collection available in the library, as Leah said. So if there's a particular issue, whoops, if there's a particular issue here that you don't see, feel free to get in touch with us, and you know, we can provide a PDF or a scanned copy of that issue. And we're going to keep adding new content, as I said, to this site. So keep checking back. Follow us on Instagram too at Stevens Archives, because we like to highlight certain collections and post about things that are of interest to us as archivists and as researchers and as members of the Stevens community. So hopefully you, hopefully you find them interesting too. So thanks for coming out, everyone. Reach out to me if you have any questions. My email is in the presentation. It's thoughta@stevens.edu. And stay safe and stay well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all very, very much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate that you were here, and we're really looking forward to ways that we can get alumni involved more. There was a comment that came in just recently that talked about the Smithsonian Archives and how they have the public transcribe manuscripts. And so this, the attendee suggested that maybe we could get some alumni participation in looking at that kind of thing. I know that Leah and Ted are always looking at ways to get alumni involved and engaged with the archives and special collections. So we're definitely going to follow up with all those suggestions. And I just want to say thanks to Leah and Ted for all the work that they're doing to digitize all these materials, to organize them and get them preserved in the way they should be, and to make sure that they're accessible to people who are interested in the Stevens Archives. So thanks for all of your hard work. So thank you everyone for being here. We're definitely going to follow up on all these great suggestions and questions, and we look forward to seeing you at future lectures. And please stay tuned, stay well, and keep in touch. Thank you. Have a great day.